All right, let's talk about the factors that influence the cost of your website. As we've talked already, you can see that a website is a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that are going to affect the price. So once you take this plan that you get from the portal and you start to shop it around, where a lot of people get confused is there's going to be a huge disparity in a lot of cases of pricing. I hear all the time like, oh, someone quoted $1,000 and some person quoted $20,000. And I want to sort of speak to that so that as you go into interviewing and hiring, your mind is open to what the potential variables could be. And I made a list and I'm just going to go through it quickly. So the first one is something we've already talked about as well, informational versus conversion rate optimized. An informational website is just that. It is information on a website. It looks good, but there's not a lot of strategic thought, copywriting, infographics. Like it's just information. But if you're looking for that conversion optimized website, which we've discussed before, you now have the copywriters in there and you have a UX consultant potentially. And there's a lot more thought and intentionality that goes into a conversion rate optimized website. So number one, that decision, informational versus conversion rate optimized. Number two, the skills of the person. If you're hiring someone from like a freelancer site like Upwork or something like that, I hear this all the time because we're not cheap. Like we're definitely in the higher end pricing wise. I hear all the time like, I'd love to work with you, but I'm going to hire someone cheaper, and that's absolutely fine. But just keeping in mind that cheaper is not necessarily better. In the world of tech, in the world where there's so much margin for error, you want to hire as much experience as you can afford. Um, in my experience, having worked with developers who are super cheap and developers that are super expensive, in my experience, freelance, like hiring them to work for me, the ones who have more experience are more expensive, but there's way less mistakes, way less confusion, way more efficiency because they know how to do it properly. So a lot of the time, it's like I'll look at the cheaper person and what may have taken that cheaper person 3 hours, took my experienced person 35 minutes. And so is it really cheaper? Like, you got to do that math for yourself, right? So, but the more experienced they are, the more expensive they're going to be. But that also means the more efficient they're going to be and the less worry you have that the job is going to be bad quality, right? So that's kind of the second thing. And number three is the location of the person. We're in a global marketplace, no question about it, and it's a beautiful thing. But hiring someone from North America is always going to be more expensive than hiring someone from like the Ukraine or from India or Indonesia because our labor costs are higher. We can't work for $5 an hour in North America. Like it doesn't work like that. Like my team is based in Vancouver, one of the most expensive cities in the world to live. Like if I'm paying people, I have to pay a living wage, and that living wage is higher than it would be if we were in Bangladesh or Pakistan. And so just consider that like a North American team or a North American freelancer is not going to be able to compete price wise with someone in India. It's not possible. So it's not comparing apples to apples. So if you're looking for a quote from India, keep in mind it's going to be absolutely cheaper. But with that comes other factors that you need to consider in terms of time zone differences, language differences, cultural differences, the understanding of our market, things like that. And again, they both work. It's not that one is better than the other. It's just you have to be clear that it's two totally different sort of shopping environments, as it were. The functionality of your website. The more complex the functionality is, the more expensive your website is going to be. And it's not just purely in cost of labor. You're going to have to buy plugins, or you're buying tools, or you're buying different things to make your website do certain things, like membership plugins or e-commerce and custom graphics, and it depends completely on the functionality is really going to drive the price higher or lower depending on how complex this website, what it has to do, obviously. Support services. So beyond website design and development, you may be looking at getting a logo done, a copywriter, a search engine optimization and SEO person. You may be looking for help with social media. You may be help with someone to create content for you for your blog on a regular basis. Those are all factors that are going to fall outside of the cost of the website itself. So keeping that in mind. Whether you hire a team or an individual, hiring a team is always going to be more expensive because you're paying a project manager, you're paying a QA person, you're paying like admin support time. But usually when you hire a team, the efficiency of the project, it just goes so much higher because they have generally one of everything. Like I know on our team, for example, just to give you some context for this, we have a process for planning the site, and then the plan goes to the design goes to the developer goes to the QA person, the QA person goes back to the developer for any final edits or whatever, and then it goes, back. And it's just, but we have an internal process, so everybody knows what's next. There's no gaps. So if it goes from a designer to developer, the designer knows what the developer needs, and the developer knows what the QA person needs, and we're all working together in the same system. Because what happens is, a lot of times in the case of splitting it, let's say you got the designer that you hired from over here, and so this designer designs in, let's say Photoshop or something, and then you take that Photoshop mock-up and you send it over to the developer, but the developer doesn't work with Photoshop, and the developer works with Figma, and he doesn't understand how to use Photoshop. And so now you've got this communication problem, and then if the developer has any questions about the design, he has to talk to the designer, but they don't know each other, and it just kind of creates this sort of messy flow, and you're usually stuck in the middle. Where when you have a team, there's a project manager who runs the job and makes sure that that flow works. And you save a lot of back and forth and a lot of time, and there's no sort of handling questions about who does what and how, because we all have a system, we all have a process. So, but hiring a team is more expensive, but by far more efficient than patching it together with multiple people. Maintenance and security costs. One thing that once the website is done, you're going to want to onboard like a maintenance plan. A website, if you're, let's say a WordPress website, it's like a car. If you don't maintain it, it's gonna break. I'm not gonna say the same for Webflow or something like that, but if it's a WordPress website, you definitely want to put in place someone to kind of keep everything up to date, everything running smoothly. And then training. Sometimes we have clients who, they know how to use their website and they don't need us to train them, but there's other cases where we have a client and they don't know how to do anything, so they pay us for training and ongoing support. So those are all factors that are going to affect the cost of the website. So as you are getting quotes, keep that in mind. Like, let's say you get a quote in, does that include training? Does that include maintenance? So ask the person who sent the quote, does that include my logo? Does that include, and clarify what it is. And again, from this portal, from this plan, they're going to know what you're looking for. But don't be afraid to ask, Don't be afraid to ask, say, hey, does this include offboarding to me? Does this include ongoing support? Does this include a warranty? Does this include revisions, policy, all that kind of stuff? So make sure that you know exactly what you're getting so there's no confusion later. I'll see you in the next video.